Welcome to TrineDay's Roundtable 33, Reclaim the Mystic, Resurrecting JFK, Spirit of Peace through the Magic of Love Field. I am Bruce Taurus, moderating. Jason Bradbury, independent journalist, is going to present on hidden Masonic designs in major American cities. Then Dr. Richard B. Spence, Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Idaho, will discuss the history of the Masons. Then authors Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould will discuss the deep Fitzgerald history leading to JFK's assassination and the importance of Dallas's Love Field Airport to the completion of that ritual. But first, our host, publisher Chris Milligan.
Thank you, Bruce, very much for that introduction. And thank you, everybody, for spending your time here with us. There's other things that you could be doing. And, you know, a round table is a mystical operation. It basically, from King Arthur. And the Fitzgeralds are intimately involved with King Arthur and English history. And, I first came across the idea of King Kill 33 in about 1989 with the book Apocalypse Culture. And then later in 1993, Secret and Suppressed came out by Jim Keith. And he had an article in there by this gentleman by the name of James Shelby Downward, who was a little bit strange to say the least. And basically, from information I've been able to glean, is when he was a child, he was used in Masonic rituals because there are certain Masonic circles that like to have children in their rituals, especially young ones that they consider innocent. The history of James Shelby is very strange. Dr. Spence has done a lot of deep dives in them. Okay, and in Secret and Suppressed that came out in 93, they continued to talk about there was this alchemical ritual that if you perform this alchemical ritual, you could control the world. Basically, the first part of it was destroying primordial matter, and that was supposedly accomplished at the Trinity site, the 33rd latitude. The second part is the killing of the king. The killing of the king ritual goes back far into prehistory. It's a thinking that you have to continue the divine presence here on the world through the king, through the dropping of a spilling of blood on the ground and ritual sacrifice. And then the third part it's been presented differently at different times in different books. Sometimes it's been presented as the third part of it was the bringing of the star matter back down to earth, and that was the Houston thing. Well, in Secret and Suppressed, they actually talk there that it's a little bit different. They say that the third part, in a literal and alchemical sense, the making manifest of all that is hidden is the accomplishment of the third law of the alchemist, and it is yet unfulfilled, or at least not completed. Two laws have been manifested: the creation and destruction of primordial matter and the killing of the king. The remaining law is to be revealed through researchers using the Freedom of Information Act. Okay, that was written in 1993. Okay, and now also in the same article that was in Secret and Suppressed, Sorcery, Sex, and Assassination, they talk about Kennedy, and that the Gaelic word is the Gaelic word for ugly head or wounded head. And, and they go into all kinds of, about Oswald and Ruby, and then all the threes that are involved around the Kennedy assassination, and that link it to Masonic lore. And I always looked at it that you had 11 and 22, and when you look at numerology, especially classical numerology, you have 11, and then you have no numbers in between. That next one's 22, and then 33, and 11 and 22, one means mastery and the other one means super mastery. So if you're the master and you kill the king and take his power, and you're telling it to the people, then we must be the slaves. Now, I am very happy that in the late 60s and 70s, I did a lot of study on magic and mysticism, not to become a magician, but trying to understand what these people were talking about and what it meant. And one thing I found is that magic is as magic does. Also, we just did a book recently called My Cosmic Trigger. And in there, he talks about the difference between apocalypse and Armageddon. Basically, apocalypse is derived from the Greek word meaning unveiling or revelation, leading to enlightenment and understanding knowledge. Okay. And Armageddon is a catastrophic global conflict. Okay. So I'd much rather go through apocalypse, okay, than Armageddon. Okay. And so that's basically what we're talking about here. And this is all a natural progression. Also, one thing that, when I started reading about magic and mysticism in the late 60s and 70s, I came across a book called A View Over Atlantis by John Michel. And he also wrote another book called A City of Revelation. And in there, he talks about these grids, these energy ley lines that are go around the earth. Okay, and it's just like we have key lines as one unital bodies. The acupuncturists, they can trace these different lines, and you have the same thing around the earth as being a one unital value. You have these lines of energy. We can help set up these lines and use them because, like, when you look in prehistory, you have Stonehenge, you have these henges all around the world, and you have people that talk about that there was a worldwide power grid, and the pyramids are actually energy type things, way to pull up energy. And they would talk about, well, you have this little radio thing that would turn on and allow you to get the energy from who knows. Okay, but there's obviously something out there. Okay. Another thing, there was an article, I believe it was in the Washington Post, and it was from a nature magazine, but they were talking about how we started in Africa down south and went up and went out to the Levant and Europe and all stuff. But they didn't go over to the other parts of Africa, they were thinking. And because they were caught into this one mindset. Okay, but now we live in a time of amazing revelation with the DNA stuff that they're doing, the understandings that we're being able to find out about our world, okay, and about us as people. It's just amazing the knowledge that is happening. One person was looking at it and says, basically, we're a mix of a mix of a mix of a mix, because people travel around. They go see somebody. Oh, what are you doing over there? And so our history is much more than, oh well, this. It's much more nuance and stuff. And we're all together. We're one people. We're one race, and we have had people for thousands of years here using our little differences to divide us and whatnot. But now, with the personal computer and the internet, we, the people, have the power to take control and run this planet for our best devices and for our children. I met Mr. Barry in New Orleans. We were putting on conferences about Oswald because we were supposed to, hate Oswald because he killed our president. Well, it was very interesting when Judith Very Baker, well, she wouldn't come to the States. I finally says, Judy, please come to the States. She says, okay, well, can we celebrate Oswald's birthday? I didn't even think about it. Sure. She said, yes, come on over. We got this cake and we put Oswald with his hands up like this with the handcuff. And we were sitting there in Toronto, Canada. And Judith takes a knife and cuts right through the handcuffs. And all of a sudden it hits me. It says, oh, well, this is a heck of a political act. We aren't supposed to like that guy. And here this lady is celebrating his birthday. Okay. And I was able to watch over the next couple of years, by holding a birthday party for Lee Harvey Oswald, how it went from his grave being urinated on to having stuff left there for them and whatnot. So us people, we can change the world. We just have to do it. And I think if you have children, you definitely know you got a reason why to do it. So I met Jason there. He was doing the video and audio, did a great job. And then I learned too that besides doing that, he was breaking national stories. He was an independent journalist. And so we become friends. And then a while back, Jason got a hold of me and he showed me something. And I says, wow, okay. Because he's really tapped in to something that shows us some of our hidden history, something that's been going on behind our backs, you might say, for many. And I want to make sure that people, again, this isn't evilness, okay? This is a thing. This is a reality. Just like a gun is a thing. It's not evil. It's not bad. It's what people do with it. Thank you all again for coming, but I just wanted to really set this up because this really is revolutionary, and thank you, Jason, very much for everything that you found here.
Now we'll go right to Jason Bradbury.
Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to be in this forum. I just want to make a few disclaimers. I am not in any way a subject matter
Expert
on the JFK assassination. Having said that, I have little doubt it was a conspiracy from what I've seen. The evidence, I think, is overwhelming, and the body of work that Chris TrineDay and his authors have done, I think, is a testament to that. And I think it'll serve as a historical record for truth seekers for years to come. I want to say that I am not a Freemason nor a member of any secret society. That goes against my constitution as a journalist. I'm supposed to tell everybody everything I know. That's my only credo. I did have a passing fascination with Freemasonry as a child. My father was a Freemason. I used to ask him about his ring, but it was never anything serious. How did I get into this is the question. I ended up kind of backing into this whole thing in a very serpentine way. What happened was I got caught up in a puzzle treasure hunt book that was published in 1982 by a guy named Byron Price. The book is called The Secret of Treasure Hunt, and I became obsessed with the puzzles in this book. And what I began to realize was that the secret the book was revealing was that there are what I would call Masonic grids that exist in cities all around the country and North America in general. What do I mean by this? Well, they are topographical designs that form anything from simple triangles to more complex symbols like pentagrams, pyramids, and Masonic compasses. And they run across entire downtown city landscapes by feet, yards, miles. They even run down to the inch. And this in itself is not really a new discovery. There have been many books published on our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and how it's laid out in very strange designs until you look at the street cribs from overhead. And then suddenly you start to see more complex symbols used by Freemasons. Probably the most common is the White House pentagram, which many people have already identified in numerous books and documentaries. Another common one is the Capitol owl. When looked at from overhead, the Capitol and its surrounding landscape seem to form the figure of an owl with outstretched wings. That is actually the owl of Minerva, which is a favorite deity of Masonic mythology. So these designs are no longer secret. They're pretty well known, although the Freemasons have never fessed up to their involvement to it. We know that the city was originally designed by Pierre Charles Lafont, who was rumored to be a Freemason. We're not sure about that, but we know that he was operating under the watchful eye of two very well-known Freemasons, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. What people haven't realized is the incredible depth and intricacy in the designs of the entire city of DC. And the fact that this design is ongoing, it's still expanding. And the question is, how do I know this? Well, once I saw the puzzles in the book, it basically showed me how the grids work. It's not terribly complicated on face value. They are not just random overhead designs. They are laid out on specific azimuths or compass directions along 360 degrees. And then also quite often at specific distances like 1,776 feet, which of course is the year 1776. I refer to this combination of measurements as vectors, direction and distance. So I call it kind of the vector solution. The puzzles in the book work the same way, and they actually utilize the existing Masonic grids in each respective city. The puzzle grids are actually laid over the existing Masonic grids. And if you can crack that code, you can not just discover the puzzle solutions, you can also identify the existing Masonic grids in each city with a little work. And that is the secret of the book. The book is titled The Secret. So that is kind of the big secret that you learn by doing the puzzles. Along those vectors in these Masonic grids, you will find monuments, buildings, lodges, cryptic symbols in general that are great significance to the Freemasons. Some of them are very cryptic, like this crazy black pyramid, which popped up in front of the Louisiana Supreme Court building right around 2020. This thing is it's in the French Quarter, and it just popped up out of nowhere. It's a black pyramid with a black plaque, and there's nothing written on the plaque. Unless maybe there is, and we just don't know how to read it. So this is the level of cryptic stuff we're talking about. There may be no direct or overt visual representation of Masonic influence in these buildings and monuments and symbols, at least to the average Joe, and that's by design, because only the Masons know what they built. So forgive the overused adage, but these designs are hidden in plain sight to the general public, but known only to the initiates of the order. These vectors within 360 degrees of a compass are not just random directions. They are sacred numbers that are used to align these grids to what's known as sacred geometry. And if you know the sacred numbers, you can distinguish the sacred geometry on which these grids are laid out on. So quickly, I want to run through this. The most important numbers are 3, 33, and 333. Can't stress how important these numbers are. They are the most common and sacred vectors in the process. The next are the numbers 32 and 322. I think this has something to do with Scottish Rite Freemasonry in specific. I'm not sure. Maybe Dr. Spence could speak to that. I'm not sure why they're important numbers. 25 and 52 are very important, as together they represent the Hermetic Credo, as above, so below. When you flip 25 over, you get 52 as a mirrored image. So it represents kind of the mirrored reality of the mantra, as above, so below. Next, the number 222 is also of importance, and I believe that number means there's something hidden within whatever it is associated with. So it could be a street address, it could be a building, it could be a page in a book, but there's something that is cryptic within inside of that 222 denoted thing. Then also the numbers 12 and 13 of importance. Also, any double number like 11, 22, obviously 33, 44, 55, 66, 77 is a really important number too. I would say only behind 33 in terms of the double numbers. 88 and then 99. So I'm not sure why these numbers are important, but they are. There are also some other random numbers like 303, 313, 355 that I found to be very significant. And I'm not sure what they mean, but also I don't have it on this image, but 0 degrees, which is often associated with the Northern Star, is very important. So let's look inside this famous, or rather infamous, street grid pentagram. The White House pentagram is what I would call it, in Washington, D.C. So when you flip this guy over from north-south to south-north, you're going to see something here immediately, or you should. So take a look at that and see if you can recognize something immediately by that, by flipping this upside down. That is, yeah, that's unmistakably a Masonic compass. There's no question it's a Masonic compass, and I'm going to explain to you why there's no question here. When you look at the compass, you will see a series of squares and circles along it, and each one of these squares and circles are named, are parks named after American war heroes of various wars, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War of 1812. Starting at the top, you have Lafayette Square directly above the north lawn of the White House. And this is pretty crazy because the Marquis de Lafayette was actually French, but the Marquis de Lafayette was also probably the most celebrated war hero of the Revolutionary War, only behind George Washington. And they were both, of course, 33-degree Freemasons. Here he is honored directly above our White House. You will notice the landscape forms a Templar cross. You can see that, see if you can see my cursor here. Yeah, right over here. Obviously, this is a Templar cross. And right in the middle, you have Marquis de Lafayette on a horse in the middle of this cross. So if you look at these street vectors of this compass, every vector is, you guessed it, a sacred vector: 66 degrees, 0 degrees, 113 degrees, 333 degrees, 25 degrees. So not only that, every single American war hero honored along this compass is, once again, you guessed it, 33-degree Freemason: DuPont, Logan, Hancock, Farragut. All of these guys were 33-degree Freemasons. This is unmistakably a Masonic design right above our White House. Within that, the context of that pentagram, you just have to turn it over and take a different look at it. So that the fact that DC has Masonic designs, I think, is not that big of a revelation. But what I think is a revelation that I'm going to tell you is that I'm pretty sure these designs and grids exist in every major city in North America. Every city I've examined in the US and Canada has some form of Masonic grid, varying in complexity. It's always in their downtown areas, and sometimes it extends beyond. Some more notable ones are my own city: New Orleans, San Francisco, Detroit, Houston, Denver, Chicago, Milwaukee, Charlotte, and Charleston. The Carolinas are incredible in general. Then, of course, you know, the Eastern Seaboard cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. We all know they were heavily Masonically influenced city. Also in Canada, Montreal, it's pretty amazing. I understand this claim may invoke a high degree of skepticism. I get it. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time here to lay out my evidence and findings about this specific claim. So I need to switch gears to the subject matter at hand, which is Dallas, and also the JFK assassination in Dallas, and how it may relate to grids in respect to ritual. So we have to start by asking, number one, does Dallas have Masonic grids? And to do that, you know, I had to back up, not look at anything to do with JFK to see if there actually were these grids, which I've learned how to identify. And the answer is absolutely, I believe there are. And in fact, I think it's one of the most heavily Masonic influenced cities I've seen in the US. What you're looking at here, it's kind of hard to see, but if you could see, there's a green compass, basically, what looks like either our pyramid. There's actually another pyramid within inside of this pyramid, but you see the green lines, those vectors. I believe that was the first original design of the city, Masonic design of the city. And along those vectors, there are incredibly important Masonic monuments and things, but I don't have time to show you to dig down that deep. To the left, you'll see a pink pyramid, which I believe was created later, but it's kind of an inverse of the original compass, and they're lined up together. It's kind of like a as above, so below thing, 2552. They're mirroring each other. Okay, so this is what I believe the two original designs of Masonic influence are in the city of Dallas. They have two main things in common on each end. The western end of both compasses converge on the Dallas Scottish Rite Temple, and that they converge on a single vector of 88 degrees. And that 88-degree vector to the running to the northeast side lands right here on this obelisk in Dealey Plaza. And that obelisk is absolutely Masonically influenced. You'll notice it has 13 sections. They represent the 13 body parts of Osiris, which is a common myth in Freemasonry. And Dealey itself is very Masonically influenced. The entire plaza, the actual design of the plaza, the shape of it. But that particular obelisk is in a really weird place, man. It's like, if you have OCD, this would drive you crazy. If you can see my cursor, there's a reflecting pool right here, and it's not lined up to the reflecting pool. It's off. It's catty corner to it. It's just in a very weird spot. So it's kind of really aggravating if you have OCD and want it to line up. So why is that? George Bannerman Dealey, he was a publisher of the Dallas Morning News around the beginning of the 20th century, and as luck would have it, he was a master Freemason. Also, the location marks what is the official birthplace of the city of Dallas, which was founded by a guy named John Neely Bryan. He was an early Presbyterian settler, farmer, lawyer, and you know what else? He was a master Freemason. So the obelisk serves multiple purposes. It's not just a ground zero spot for the city of Dallas. It's also a ground zero and primary measurement marker for these Masonic grids in the city. And this is the same in every city I've looked at. It's with the same with the Washington Monument in DC. It's the same thing here in my own city in New Orleans. This seemingly inconspicuous obelisk, which has billboards on it, is actually right next to the Superdome, and it's 222 feet tall. But it serves as a primary marker to measure the Masonic grids within inside of my own city of New Orleans along sacred geometry vectors. Now in Dallas, on the other end of the compass, besides from the obelisk, both the top and bottom of the compass converge at the Scottish Rite Temple on the west side. And why is that? And that's because I believe that that the Masons were behind the original design of downtown Dallas. I believe the layout of the downtown area was originally Masonic to a large extent. I don't have time to run down every location on these Dallas compass grids and why they're Masonic, but I'm happy to address that with anyone in another forum. And here I offer you the maps and the vectors to look at yourself on Google Earth if you so desire. What we're looking at right here, though, the green being the first one on the left, these have nothing necessarily to do with the JFK assassination from its inception. They were here a century, decades to a century before the event occurred in 1963. However, when I started to look at elements of the assassination, some amazing coincidences, if you want to call them that, started to occur. The first is the obvious. Of all of the route that JFK took from Love Field to this point where he was assassinated, it was a 10-mile, pretty circuitous route. So out of all of the places that this could have happened along that route, it happened right here at Dealey. The kill point happened at Dealey, pretty close to the obelisk. That's pretty coincidental to on face value. I mean, this route was a 10-mile journey. So if we consider that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and he conspired to shoot him, he decided to do it right there at that point. And I guess, maybe there were more people there. I don't know what the reasoning for it was, but it's pretty eerie that it happened at Dealey to begin with. To compound that uncanny coincidence, the kill zone on Elm Street at Dealey is the only street on that 10-mile route that runs at 33 degrees. And not only that, the street itself doesn't completely run at 33 degrees. You can see it's curved, but the point where the kill zone was, it's about 55 yards total. I mean, well, at least that stretch of street is, and it's at 33 degrees. So that's interesting to me because right up here is the Texas School Book Depository, and this is where Oswald would have been. So the car you can see is coming down North Houston, and it takes a turn right here. So at this point, he was only about 25 yards from Kennedy on the 6th floor. He waited until the car got down to this point, which put him literally over twice the distance at about 60 yards in order to take the first shot, if the official story is correct. So that's curious to me that, the kill zone happened in this 33-degree vector. That street itself, Elm Street, and this is subjective depending on how you measure it. But what I did was I measured it from the middle of the intersection down to the intersection of Elm, Main, and Commerce underneath the train track. It runs at 555 feet. Now, 555 is associated with death quite often in Masonic symbolism. Actually, this map on the right is a 1901 outline plan from Michigan Senator James McMillan for the mall in Washington, D.C. And does that look familiar? The cardinal points are even aligned correctly with the head at the western end. And I think this is a reference to the 3rd-degree ritual in Freemasonry, where the initiate, when he rises from a coffin, he rises facing the east. That's a little tangent, but I just wanted to throw this in there. But back to Dealey, this 33-degree vector gets really weird now Because if you look right here, you can see where they've marked the 2 shot points on Elm Street. This was the first shot point. This was the second shot point down here, if you can see my cursor. From the second shot point here, the headshot, which actually killed him, this was the alleged grassy knoll being over here, shot, or the magic bullet, whichever theory you want to believe in, to the first shot point up here, it's exactly 33 yards at 33 degrees. And I mean exactly. So once again, this is not just the only stretch of street that runs at 30 degrees on the entire route from Love. This is the only stretch of street on this particular stretch of Elm Street that runs at 33 degrees. It's uncanny. JFK was shot twice at 33 yards at 33 degrees from the point this vehicle was traveling down Elm. When you throw in the grassy knoll shooter conspiracy, and I realize this is incredibly speculative about whether he existed or not, this is the area where he was alleged to be behind this fence. So I'm assuming that he would have been pretty close, at least to that corner in the fence, to get the best shot. Once again, this is highly speculative, but if he was at that location, the second shot trajectory looks to be at approximately 99 degrees. So this may be irrelevant, but if you follow that azimuth, you land directly on the Dealey Plaza obelisk. So that puts the shot point in between the shooter and the obelisk. That's an amazing coincidence unto itself. But what's more amazing is that in 1970, Dallas built the JFK Memorial Plaza to commemorate the assassination. But for some reason, they didn't put it in Dealey Plaza. They put it over here right over here behind the courthouse, the old courthouse. So it just so happens that the memorial headstone for that for that memorial is on that 99-degree azimuth. In fact, all 3 points from the grassy knoll positions are at thirds of a distance down that azimuth. It's a total of 247 yards. And from yards from the grassy knoll to the memorial, on 3 points, the knoll, the obelisk, and the memorial, the distance between each point is divided by thirds. I point this out because the memorial was obviously erected after the assassination happened, but it's exactly on that 99-degree vector from the alleged angle of the second shooter. It begs the question, why? Why wasn't it put in Dealey? Was this kind of a nod, wink, wink, nod, nod? I don't know, but it's very curious. What's also curious is if you look at this trajectory shot, the shooter's line of sight would have been lining up the target with the obelisk directly behind JFK as he moved down the street. So the obelisk could have served as a marker for the alleged sniper. Perhaps he waited for Kennedy to line up between himself and the obelisk to take the shot. Obviously, he would have been shooting downwards because he's on a knoll, so he'd have been looking down. But the obelisk itself would still be visible right behind the point where Kennedy was. That's pretty curious as well. Let me stress, this is speculation, obviously. I'm not stating this as fact. But the odds of all these vectors and them lining up the way it does stretches credulity for me for it to be sheer coincidence. That's just for me. I can't speak to the ritual aspect of it, but I can certainly tell you these aspects of the geometry line up with sacred measurements, at least the ones I've become aware of. There are more complicated vectors, which I don't have time to go through at the moment, but there is one that I must provide, which happened without my own realization. Paul and Elizabeth kept asking me to look at Love Field, and for some reason I was reticent to do that. I don't know why. I just didn't think it was important. But finally, I'm like, okay, I'll look at it. And Love is a huge area, so I'm like, that's not really helping me. What's so important about Love? And what was important was that Air Force One was parked at Love, which was the exact place that JFK got off, touched the ground before he started the route to Dealey Plaza. And it's also where LBJ was sworn in. So after doing some sleuthing online, there's actually a plaque at Love Field that denotes where the plane was. Now, it's a big plane, mind you, but I used the plaque as the measurement. So I ran a vector from the first shot point, the first bullet, that I showed you at Dealey, and in fact, the second bullet lines up at the same vector because it's such a long distance to the plane, and it was exactly 8,866 yards at 333 degrees. If that is not by design, if that's random, that's like hitting the lottery to me, because we're talking about a 5.6-mile stretch. So for that specific vector 333 to line up that way, is that totally defies credulity for me. Having shown you this, there's so much more I could show you about Dallas. I simply don't have the time here. Suffice to say, I don't understand the ritual aspect. I'm still learning about that. And what I will say is I'm totally convinced there was clear design in this assassination that I believe took place on a meta level, if you will. And I think it utilized the existing Masonic grids in the city. I can't prove that simply by the small body of evidence that I presented here, because there's such a high degree of plausible deniability. It's like trying to untie a pretzel. There was design behind it, but when you try to unravel it, it starts to break apart. Overall, I will say it's my personal speculative opinion based on what I know to be fact, that what I've learned from the designs of these Masonic grids, there's absolutely a clear pattern here, and there are fingerprints here of at least someone using these designs in this assassination. It may not have been the Freemasons, I don't know, but somebody knew about these grids, I believe personally. That's all I will say at this point, and thanks a lot for listening to me, guys.
Thank you very much, Jason. And we're going to move right along with Dr. Richard Spence. How are you?
I'm doing well. Well, I guess what I've been called here to invited, that's better, to talk about is something about Freemasonry, the origins of Freemasonry, because let's face it, they're the guys who in some way are either being blamed or credited for most of the things that are being talked about here. So who are the Freemasons? So let me start out by saying that I'm not like Jason. I'm not part of the Brotherhood. A lot of people in my family were, and I now realize that I grew up around a lot of this stuff, but I have no particular connection with it. I just come at it from the standpoint of a nosy Cowan, Masonic term for an outsider who wants to know way too much about Masonry without being a member. So I think I apparently qualify for that. Freemasonry is a house of many rooms. It's not one thing. The term itself, no one owns that term. It's never been owned by anyone. There have been organizations that have described themselves as Freemasonic of very different viewpoints. So in some way, the term is almost generic. It can basically be used by anybody. Okay, I could go out and collect 15 people and we could declare ourselves a Masonic lodge. No other Masons would recognize us as such, more than likely. The origin of Freemasonry has been traced back to King Solomon. There's a lot. King Solomon plays a very important symbolic sort of mythic role in Freemasonry and its rituals. It's even been pushed all the way back to Adam. Another name that crops up in some references to its origin is Euclid, the guy that gave us geometry. And keep that in mind in terms of what Jason was talking about. Physical geometry, the drawing of lines on maps, just as he was showing, is very important within much of the Masonic tradition. The idea is that somehow it connects to Euclid. And Euclid at one point is said to not only have developed geometry, but also what's called a counterfeit geometry. I have no idea what that is, but apparently it's like gravity and anti-gravity in some way. So there are different references, all of which are essentially mythical. That is, there's not anything carved in stone or written on paper that prove any of those connections. King Solomon becomes a central figure in Masonic ritual. That's just there. The other thing which comes up very often, the one that you probably want to hear about, is the connection between the Freemasons and the Knights Templar. That's one of those things that by the 18th century, by the time of the American and French Revolution, when Freemasonry was becoming a big thing, this idea became very popular. It was widely believed. It is still widely believed today I don't think you would find many people within Freemasonry who would claim it as a fact. Rather, it's one of those things that you can believe or not believe in some way, but it's a popular concept. And maybe that's the point I would want to make here, is that whether or not it's true, whether there is actually any connection, real connection between the Templars and the Freemasons, of which, by the way, there's no documentary evidence. There's nothing, there's no line of succession. That's something which is assumed, but the important part isn't even whether that's true, but that by the 18th century, among the growing members of this growing fraternal order, the belief became commonplace that there was. And so the question is, why were the Templars so popular among the Freemasons? And this continues. Some of you who may be Freemasons would know that the kind of boys' auxiliary of American Freemasonry is the Demolays. They were created around 1919. So in the 20th century, American Freemasons decided to name their boys' auxiliary the Demolays. And who's that? What is that? Well, that's Jacques de Molay, the last martyred Grand Master of the Templar Order. Guy who was burned at the stake in Paris in 1314. Now, here somebody might say, well, see, that proves the connection. No, it doesn't. We know that he was burned at the stake, and we know that hundreds of years later, American Freemasons decided to name their auxiliary after him. The interesting thing is why? What did Freemasonry see in the Templars? What the Templars were victims of, and they're much more the victims of this, is they were victims of a conspiracy between the French monarchy and elements within the Roman Catholic Church. Pretty much it's the French monarchy. The French king, a greedy fellow named Philip the Fair, pretty clearly coveted their wealth and their land, and therefore decided to have them discredited in the eyes of the church. He largely controlled the papacy, and he got the Pope to sign off and essentially disestablish, I think it was a monastic order, having their lands and property seized by the French crown and others, and destroying it as an organization. Now, there's a whole story in that, which we might go to, but that's essentially what it came down to. The Templars who were set upon and destroyed in a conspiracy between the French monarchy and the Roman Catholic Church. That, in the eyes of some later, that in the eyes of 18th century Freemasons, turned the Templars into martyrs. Whatever else they might have been, leaving aside, whatever it was they were worshiping, the rest of us, they became in their eyes martyrs to the evils of monarchy and the church. And here again, you can see this. One of the places this is very strongly expressed is in the French Revolution in particular, which involved many French Freemasons, is that what does it seek to destroy? What does it go after? It destroys the monarchy, and it attempted and nearly destroyed the church. The policies of the early radical period was to completely de-Catholicize the country, to utterly destroy the church. So in that sense, people, and there were a lot of them in the 18th century, who had come to hate monarchy and the church, an established church, could look back and see in the Templars martyrs to their cause, someone who was admirable because of at whose hands they suffered. So that's where you get another story. And again, it's a story, not a fact. And that's when King Louis XVI was guillotined and his head fell from the scaffold down into a basket. Someone's supposed to have run forward from the crowd and to have shouted, "Jacques de Molay, you are avenged." So here again, the idea is that the death of the French king was avenging the headmaster of the Templar order. It's not important whether someone actually did that. That's not the key point. The idea is that someone told the story. But that shows you how embedded this connection, an undocumented connection, one that may or may not exist, has become a central part of the Masonic ideology. Who came up with the idea to begin with? Who seems to have started the idea that the Templars and the Freemasons were connected? It's a fellow by the name of the Chevalier Andrew Ramsay. He's a Scotsman living in France. He was a Freemason. He was also an early version of a Scottish Rite Freemason. In 1737, he wrote a kind of open letter to other Freemasons. And in that, he put forward his views about the origin of the fraternity and where it came from. And he makes a reference to the fact that we, Freemasons, are the successors to the Crusaders of old. But that's all he says. He never actually anywhere in that mentions the Templars. He mentions the Knights of St. John that are a different order, but never mentions them. And this is one of the things that you can often find in this kind of research, is that you're told that there's this thing which exists. This is the origin of it, and then you go to the origin and it's not there. It became a story that was too good not to tell. The other element in Freemasonry is not a secret society, it's a society with secrets. So what is it supposed to be about? And I think most modern Freemasons, some of you might say, well, it's about fellowship, it's about self-improvement. The term that's often used is about making good men better. That in some way, membership in the fraternity, going through its rituals, observing its traditions and ideas, that this will improve you as a human being. The more technical description of what it is a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. So a system of morality veiled in allegory, illustrated by symbols. Well, yeah, that explains everything, right? Now you know exactly what it is. No, this is the explanation that does not explain everything, because that's what you have to get inside to be a part of, to figure. They don't give that stuff away for free. But it also gives you an idea as to how broad that can be. I mean, imagine if that itself is the only description, a system of morality. Well, what morality? It doesn't say. Anyone that you make up. Veiled in allegory. What allegories? Well, it doesn't say. Which ones do you like? And illustrated by symbols. What symbols? Doesn't say. Make up some symbols. Use the ones that you like. And that's, again, is why it goes back to this idea that Freemasonry is a house of many rooms. So whatever it is somebody may have told you that Freemasons can never do, like, you have to be at least 21. Oh, and you have to be a guy. Okay, no women. Well, that's the general rule. But I guarantee you that whatever is the general rule in Freemasonry, at some point in time, people who call themselves Freemasons did exactly the opposite. Why? Because they could. Every lodge basically creates itself. It selects its members. It's like-minded people bringing in more like-minded people. When you're talking about Freemasonry, when you're talking about that house of many rooms. So another thing that you're not supposed to talk about in Freemasonry, at least within the lodge, never supposed to discuss in the lodge, politics or religion. Well, the reason for that, one reason might be, is that your politics and religion are pretty much the same, so what's to talk about? But the other is because those are the two things that are most likely to spark arguments. And you don't want brothers in a lodge meeting on official business getting into arguments over religion and politics. Freemasonry is a self-selecting process. It brings together very often people of like interests. So what you're eventually going to get, remember, in an organization in which every member must approve the admission of any new member, not the majority. Every member must approve the admission of a new member, which means that over time, you're going to get some diversity, but you're going to get mostly people who tend to think alike. That's why they're there. That's why they're there. So what you've got in that sense is the perfect petri dish. You couldn't come up with a better cauldron to brew politics, and in particular, revolutionary politics. Because the security of the lodge, the secrecy of the lodge, the brotherhood of the lodge is what would allow you to plot the overthrow of the government around you in relative security. Because what's everybody taken an oath to do? Not rat each other up. That's what it comes down to. You don't reveal what goes within the lodge. You don't reveal the secrets of Freemasonry. And you stand by each other. So Freemasonry, whatever else it might be, however sinister or benign its particular morality, allegory, and symbols may be, It is one of those things that can be put to other uses. It's a ready-made organization. And if you can manipulate that, if you can, remember, get the like-minded people within the organization, you can turn it to other purposes. And those other purposes often are political. The American and French revolutions, I'm not going to stand here and say that they're Masonic revolutions and the Masons were running everything. They weren't, but they were running a lot of it. They were disproportionately influential on events and policies. That's a discussion all on its own. French Revolution, the same. The nationalist movements of the 19th century, the same. The Young Turk Revolution, the Ottoman Empire, the same, and on and on and on. So there was a long history of Masonic politics. The other thing that Chris mentioned, James Shelby Downard. James Shelby Downard's whole thing is that the JFK assassination, along with virtually everything else in American life, is influenced by what he called Masonic sorcery. So if Masons can get involved in politics, could Masons or people using that term involve themselves in organized rituals or sorcerous activity? Well, why not? I mean, again, anything is possible. A system of morality. But where might all of these things come together? But what might show kind of glimpse of American Freemasonry and its secret side? Well, to do that, you go back to the 1920s and you look at Oklahoma state politics. The Oklahoma Democratic Party ran the entire state. All of the governors during this period are Democrats. State house is dominated by Democrats. It's very much a one-party state, but there were differences. There were factions, as there always are, within the party. And those factions were basically between those who were aligned with or against the Ku Klux Klan, which was also very powerful, very influential. And the first thing you find is that there was a great overlap in membership between the Klan and Freemasonry in Oklahoma. People who were in one tended to be in the other. If you also look at the Oklahoma state politics in the 20s, you'll see that there are two governors who are impeached. And that's pretty interesting for one Midwestern state, simply in the 1920s. And the first of those was a guy by the name of Jack Walton. And Jack Walton was anti-Klan. And he was eventually driven. I think he only spent 10 months in the governor's seat. He made them mad at him for a number of reasons. Also, although I think like he and everybody else was a Freemason, he seems to have been a dissident branch of this. So the other thing you see here is that Freemasons can be against Freemasons. The other guy in the late 20s who gets impeached is a guy by the name of Henry Johnson. He was very closely aligned with the Klan. And that sort of helped bring him into power, and partly as part of the Klan's nationwide decline is one of the things that put him out of power. Johnson is an interesting case in that not only does he see this connection between state politics. So what we're talking about here are politicians who are members of the Masonic order, who in many cases are members of the Klan. And then with Johnson, it gets even weirder because Johnson's chief advisor was a woman by the name of Mamie O. Hammonds. And she was advisor to the governor, and she's head of the Ladies Auxiliary of the KKK, and she's an Eastern Star. But the topper is that she's also a psychic who gives the governor spiritual advice, conducts seances in this house, and helps him learn to channel spirits to make political decisions. And this is all just going on in one state at that time. And I suspect those kind of connections aren't unique. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Richard, thank you. And moving right along to authors and investigators Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould.
We wanted to present today the prologue to our new book, the third version of our memoir, Valediction Revelation Prologue. Valediction Revelation represents the last of a three-part memoir, Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, which begins in Boston at the Parker House Hotel press room in 1981, where Paul stands at the exact spot where John Fitzgerald Kennedy announced his candidacy for Congress in 1946 and held his bachelor's party in 1953. The story then comes to a shocking conclusion at Love Field Airport in Dallas in 2023, following a conference commemorating the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination, where Paul delivered an address on the Fitzgerald legacy. Love Field represents the final moments in JFK's life, the place where he arrived alive and left deceased, making his final destination a mystical crossroads between heaven and earth, combining the red saltire X coat of arms for his Fitzgerald family with the red cross of the Knights Templar. Triggered by dreams and strange coincidences, Paul and Liz revealed through episodic flashbacks how they came upon clues to the imaginal dimension of the assassination and why that dimension opens a whole new meaning to JFK's life and the pivotal role Love Field plays as the alpha and omega of the story. Beginning at Dealey Plaza on the 60th anniversary of the assassination, they see how the location itself acts as a stage in a theater of Masonic symbolism. The three shots, the triple overpass, the obelisk, astral magic, masonry, and the symbolism of the Knights Templar all have a role to play in what is clearly a sorcerer's ritual. And as they travel back through the thousand-year history of JFK's Fitzgerald ancestors, they uncover how their strange coincidences relate to JFK's purpose as a Prince of Peace. Clues to the nature of some kind of mysterious connecting force that causes coincidences emerge. They learn that JFK's distant 13th century ancestor, the second Earl of Desmond, Geroid Iarla, was known for his extensive use of magic and looked upon as the mythological child of an otherworld Irish goddess. They also discover that the 14th and last Earl's severed head was sent to Queen Elizabeth I as a magic talisman to inaugurate the birth of the British Empire, and that his ghost is said to ride around his birth lake on a white steed every 7 years, waiting for his return at the end of time. They soon discover that the mysterious connecting force causing coincidence is real and has been acknowledged since ancient times and studied by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung and physicist Wolfgang Pauli as, quote, connecting principle outside of cause and effect. They also discover that this same connecting force, or as others have described it as the observer effect, is thought to be what makes magic work, and had been studied by a central character in the assassination of JFK named Arthur Young, father-in-law of Ruth Paine, Marina Oswald's guardian, as an added parameter to physics that is either a process or a drive or force or consciousness. After seeing Oliver Stone's JFK and the revelation of assassination conspirator David Ferry's involvement with the eccentric American Orthodox Catholic Church, they see the connecting principle at work in JFK's family legacy, and things get even stranger when that legacy crisscrosses into the Elizabethan underworld and its connection to a cabal of viciously anti-Catholic Neoplatonic magicians. Known for their open misogyny, John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's astrologer, the Fairy Queen Sir Edmund Spencer, Sir Walter Raleigh, her chief knight, Giordano Bruno, defrocked priest, Italian philosopher, and alchemist, and a cult of well-known historical figures from the 16th century emerge as magical anti-Catholic covert operatives who bear a distinct correspondence to the menagerie of anti-Catholic JFK conspirators put on trial by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. And as these Elizabethans weave spells and summon demons to plot the demise of the Catholic Fitzgeralds, evidence of magical plotting based on geometry, astronomy, astrology, and the art of memory reveals itself. Motivated by hatred for Rome and inspired by the rediscovery of ancient Hermetic texts attributed to the legendary Hellenistic figure Hermes Trismegistus, these Elizabethan actors seek to draw the power of the terrestrial world from Catholic Spain and deliver it to Queen Elizabeth I through the creation of a simulacrum, a thought form created by the magician to receive divine inspiration from the imaginal realm. In the words of author Dame Frances Yates, this group is driven by, quote, the belief in the correspondence of microcosm and macrocosm, in the harmonic structure of the universe, and in the comprehension of God through mathematical symbols. According to a more recent analysis, they also believe that practicing the art of memory by using images as talismans and creating mnemonic devices, i.e., patterns of letters, ideas, or associations that enhance memory, they can implement through the creation of a simulacrum, a large-scale reformation of the universe in which both celestial and earthly worlds would be purged and restored to original perfection. Yeats approached the subject of the Hermetic Renaissance magic with genuine seriousness and recognized early on in her groundbreaking research that it was a mistake for modern scholarship to dismiss the practice as fantasy, considering that it became a guiding force in the creation of the British Empire. Founded on the 15th century work of Cornelius Agrippa, based on his translations of Plato, but expanded upon over the next 2 centuries, one prominent scholar of the philosophy, Giordano Bruno, engaged in magical techniques for memorization in his 1582 book, De Umbris Idearum, on the shadows of ideas, that were so effective they led to his being burned at the stake and are still considered bordering on the supernatural. Sympathetic magic, the perceived connection between an object and the subject it represents, and mnemonics are the keys to understanding the Hermetic system, and through Yeats's studies we are given a step-by-step analysis of how Queen Elizabeth's magicians manipulated reality by literally creating a theater of cosmic correspondences similar to what Dallas's Dealey Plaza represents. In her book, Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition, she writes, quote, Bruno once more expounds in the first part of the De Imaginum composition his theory of the imagination as the chief instrument in religious and magical processes, having cited Aristotle on images from sense impressions as the basis of thought. Bruno then goes right to the other extreme of the classical tradition and uses the arguments of a late Hellenistic Neoplatonist in favor of imagination as the most powerful of the inner senses because through it the divine communicates with man. She then argues that Giordano Bruno had used this information to transform the art of memory from a fairly rational Aristotelian mnemonic technique using images, which theorists including Thomas Aquinas himself had used, into a magical and religious technique for training the imagination as the instrument for reaching the divine and obtaining divine powers. Although an accomplished historian and not in any way a practicing magician or mystic, Yeats admits that there is no other explanation to explain Bruno's use of the Hermetic tradition than to influence the gods into providing him with godly favors. She writes, quote, in an extraordinary passage in the De Imaginum composition, Bruno mentions the golden calf and the brazen image described in Genesis and the clay figures made by Prometheus as all examples of the power of the simulacrum for drawing down the favor of the gods through occult analogies, quote, whence as though linked to images and similitudes they descend and communicate themselves. And with the last phrase, we reach the familiar ground of the Egyptian statues linked with demons, which Bruno has here related to the magic of Moses and Prometheus. Yeats further describes Bruno utilizing another powerful practice where statues of the terrestrial gods were animated by arranging them in accordance with the principles of sympathetic astral magic and by drawing down into them the life of the celestial gods. It gave them the power of heaven as well as the power of demons. By the time of Bruno's arrival in London in the spring of 1583, the Fitzgerald's war against the Elizabethans was a ghost, but that did not prevent him from teaming up with the Queen's astrologer John Dee, the original 007, and his boss Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's Secretary of State, to advance the expansion of their Neoplatonic empire from the British Isles to the rest of the globe. Having fought the arrival of European Neoplatonism for 30 years, the Fitzgerald's end comes swiftly that November, when the last Earl of Desmond is beheaded while hiding from the Queen's pursuers in the misty Sleevemish Mountains. But Bruno's war on Orthodox Catholic philosophy and traditional Aristotelian philosophy as a whole has only begun and will continue for the next 2 years in London under the protection of the French ambassador. Adopting not only an anti-Catholic position, but a radically anti-Christian one as well, Bruno deepens his experimentation with magical rituals and the art of memory. In 1584, while still in London, produces a work known as De la Causa, Principio y Uno, Cause, Principle, and Unity. In De la Causa, Bruno anticipates 20th century arguments on quantum physics and articulates his conviction that there is no contradiction between spirit and matter, only the perception of difference, which explains coincidence as merely an illusion and can therefore be considered either a cause or a principle. But in his De Vinculis in Genere, of bonds and chains in general, where he displays exotic techniques for mental persuasion and control using eros, love, that bear a striking similarity to the 20th century psychological experiments conducted by the CIA's MKUltra. A recent study by Giuseppe Borelli regards De Vinculis as the foundation of modern social control, stating, quote, "At Oxford University, Giordano Bruno's brief, obscure, but very profound work, De Vinculis in Genere, is considered a cornerstone of modern political thought on the par with Machiavelli's The Prince. The London School of Economics, the West's most elite school specializing in the social sciences, uses it as a core text. In fact, many European historians and intellectuals consider De Vinculis in Genere modernity's most intelligent and insightful political work." And more specifically, Borelli states, quote, "From Machiavelli's brute force to Bruno's capacity for desires and infinity, the driving mechanism in the eros, in all its variations and its grasp on the rational and the imaginary mind. It is imagination that conquers the political throne, not force. And so the politician becomes the clockmaker of man's dreams and aspirations. His aim is to create, identify, channel, and guide the desires that spring from man's erotic nature." And in this, we again cross paths with the New Orleans conspiracy surrounding JFK and his journey to death through Love Field in Dallas. In his De Vinculis, Bruno writes, "Love is the bond of bonds, but of these bonds, the erotic bond is supreme. All affections and bonds are reduced to two, namely aversion and desire, or hatred and love. Yet hatred is reduced to love, whence it follows that the will's only bond is eros." It would seem that for Bruno, the major connecting principle sought by 15th, 16th, and 21st century magicians is the same principle sought by central figures in the JFK assassination, and that principle is eros, the quantum bonding force of hatred and love that enables magic to work. According to another scholar who studied the ramifications of Bruno's 16th century work, Professor Ion P. Coliano, De Vinculis in Genere is the template for the modern totalitarian state. He writes, "De Vinculis in Genere by Giordano Bruno is one of those little-known works whose importance in the history of ideas far outstrips that of more famous ones. In its frankness, indeed the cynicism of the analysis of its contents, it might be compared to Machiavelli's The Prince, especially as the subject matter of the two works is connected. Bruno deals with psychological manipulation in general, Machiavelli with political manipulation. But how colorless and ridiculous the Machiavellian prince adventurer now seems compared to Bruno's magician psychologist. Unpublished until late, little read and always misunderstood, De Vinculis in Genere is nevertheless the written work that deserves to have the real and unique place of honor among the theories of manipulation of the masses. Without being aware of it, the brain trusts that dominate the world have been inspired by it and put Bruno's own ideas to practical use." And so there we have it in quotes, according to a University of Chicago professor. Quote, "The magician of De Vinculis is the prototype of the impersonal system of mass media, indirect censorship, global manipulation, and the brain trusts that exercise their occult control over the Western masses. Defined by Plato as heavenly eros, the bonding force of love employed in the action of social manipulation through propaganda is both egocentric and acquisitive, and by nature selfish. Bruno excels in his use of eros as the secret force, the connecting link outside of cause and effect, to make magic work and manipulate the masses into believing whatever the magician instructs them to believe. And it is through the magical metaphor of Love Field that it finds a final correspondence with the events of November 22nd, 1963. by substituting the authentic leadership of the Irish people with the simulacrum of Queen Elizabeth and his epic poem, The Faerie Queen. Edmund Spenser was able to transform the 16th century Fitzgeralds in the popular mind into an allegory of terrestrial Catholic evil. But by sealing that mental image through magical and numerical correspondences with the ritual sacrifice of the last Earl of Desmond, Rome's mystical and terrestrial authority could be enchained and defeated. That method is seen again in Dallas as a hidden intelligence secret society priesthood working with the ancient art of sympathetic magic removed JFK from terrestrial power through a ceremonial execution in an open-air temple to Isis and Osiris in Dealey Plaza, and then enchained his power in the bond of bonds through the selfish, possessive power of Eros at Love Field. Sir James Frazer, Britain's most famous anthropologist, explained in his in-depth study of ancient rites and rituals, The Golden Bough, that when the divine king is murdered by one who is himself stronger or shrewder, the divine powers of the king are sympathetically and contagiously transferred from the vanquished to the victor. In the case of the beloved JFK, the shocking transfer of power into the subconscious dreaming mind of the American people created a new simulacrum by inducing a diametrically different new reality and represented a classic scenario of alchemical programming. In studying Bruno and his methods, it soon becomes clear that his use of ancient techniques is the foundation not just for the anti-Fitzgerald Elizabethan campaign, but is also the model for the assassination campaign targeting JFK. But if the death of JFK and the end of his vision of a world peaceful and the ascension of the human spirit could be accomplished in accordance with the philosophy of sympathetic astral magic, is it not possible that his tragedy may be undone by using a more powerful method? For those who champion the conspiracy theory surrounding the JFK assassination, to offer a philosophical solution may not be enough. But if the murder of JFK and all others like him have been made possible by a philosophy of erotic love, then perhaps another philosophy of love can provide the answer, and that philosophy has been recognized for millennia as agape. As the opposite of eros, in which we love others out of self-interest in order to acquire and possess the object of our love, agape is based on the unconditional and unselfish love of self-giving and self-sacrifice. And since JFK has already made the ultimate self-sacrifice by giving up his life, then an appeal for the return of the spirit of JFK through the power of agape at Love Field may make something possible that has never been tried before. The last Earl of Desmond was slain in 1583 while fighting to the bitter end for Irish sovereignty. Even with that devastating blow to the cause, the affection for the Fitzgerald family continued to grow. As President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy rose to the level of his great ancestor and won the affection of the American people. When he was killed, his dream for peace was killed as well. But if we who believe in his vision can come together through the all-embracing power of agape, we can resurrect JFK's dream for America and restore the hope that was lost with his death. In 1926, a folklorist recorded among the peasants of Kerry a curious belief. If on a dark night in November in the glen below Low Gur, the birthplace of the magical Earl Geroidiarla and JFK's great-grandfather, Thomas Fitzgerald, in 1823, a peasant should be given the sight, he will see a company of silver horsemen risen from the lake and galloping through the night. At their head rides the great Earl Gerald himself, garbed in silver brocade and astride a mighty white horse. The Earl will laugh and throw him a gorgeous purse in which will be found 1,000 silver pieces, the price paid for his head, and when the vision is gone, the money will remain. It is clear by the state of today's world that the Earl and his phantom soldiers are needed more than ever to rise from Low Gur and free JFK's enchained spirit from Love Field to return to the American people at our time of greatest need.
And I would just like to let you all know that we do have a plan, and our plan is to have a kickoff campaign to really try to meet the goal of resurrecting JFK's spirit of peace through the magic of Love Field. We'd like it to kick off next November 22nd, 2024, the 61st anniversary of the assassination. And that would be the start date. And we feel, considering what we're coming to right now, through the election. This is a hopeful sign that people may really feel is worth trying. And that's what we'd like to do and talk about.
Thank you. Now it's question and answer time.
I've seen the ducks were put in a row before Kennedy was shot, and people wouldn't think about that. And then I started coming saying, well, the killing fields were put in place in the 1930s, and the reasons go back to the 1300s with a lot of action in the 1500s. And so we've got the chance here to take back our country and take back our world for the people.
Yeah, Mark Harris.
Yeah, commenting on Richard's comment about the study in Oklahoma, there was also a study in Texas called the Ku Klux Klan and Freemasonry in the 1920s. That was done in Texas and documents the overlap of the Klan and the Ku Klux Klan, the Klan and Freemasonry, I'm sorry. Also, November 22nd was the anniversary of Pope Clement V's ordering the rest of the Knights Templar. One interesting thing, this may be trivia, but I came up with Jack Ruby, before the assassination, called the FBI informant and asked if he wanted to watch the fireworks. In Jewish gematria and numerology, 1230, the time the president was shot, means the fireworks. Some names you might be familiar with: Paul Bentley, Jim Lavelle, Jesse Curry, Bill Decker, Sonny Boyd. All of them are Freemasons. And then what might be the motive? I think I see these old Freemasons, particularly in the South, as patriots. Richard mentioned preserving morality, but they're also racist. Here's another list of some prominent Freemasons: Bedford Forrest, Albert Pike, Richard B. Russell, Lester Maddox, Strom Thurmond, George Wallace, Trent Lott, John Stennis, J. Edgar Hoover, Robert Byrd. So I'll get off my soapbox.
I want to augment something, Chris, you said in your original presentation of those three elements of the rituals that would take power in an alchemical way. You went quickly past the second one. You called it just the Houston thing, but I know from you, it was the bringing to Earth of the star matter, which was supposedly by virtue of the moon rocks from the Apollo missions. Do you want to flesh that out a bit, or I just wanted to put that on the record?
No, the first is destroying primordial matter, the killing of the king, and bringing back the star matter. And like I say, it's been presented a couple different ways. I mean, there's no official pronouncement. It was in these articles from James Shelby downward, and then he got together with Michael Hoffman, and they solidified it a little bit more. But before they got together and solidified it, there was another one that said that the third part was this revelation. And right. That makes more sense to me than the star matter. And then you have to worry about the moon landing and all that kind of crap. Excuse my language.
You were very clear about that part. Hey, Dotson, I see your yellow hand. What's your question?
For Richard, do you have any information about the relationship between the Freemasons and Benjamin Franklin? And also then how that carried forward in Franklin's relationship with Thomas Paine, who was a deist and not a Freemason, but wrote about Freemasonry.
You get to Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, to me, is probably the central Freemason in the American Revolution. I mean, that's including Washington there. Yes, Franklin is and closely connected with French Freemasonry, which is this is the other thing we won't go into there. Like everything else, it splinters. Okay, the tendency of everything is to bifurcate. It's the whole sort of fractal thing which goes on. So one organization becomes two. So one of the things you begin to get by the time of the American and French revolutions is already this bifurcation between British Freemasonry that was pretty much centered in the British Isles and the Empire, and the later continental or French Freemasonry. French Freemasonry was very much taken with this Templar idea. They hated the king and they hated the church. And in some ways, the great deep inner goal was to destroy both of those institutions. In England and the British Empire, something different happens, and that's where the royals become Freemasons. It's There's a very strong link between those. And so in Britain, Freemasonry becomes the secret society of the elite. They essentially become monarchists. Whereas on the continent, in France and everywhere else, including on into Russia, you essentially, the hatred of monarchy becomes one of the central Masonic goals, or the fixations.
One follow-up question. Franklin went before the High Court for sedition. Was that High Court dominated by Freemasons when he was brought before the British court because of his communications of what were considered to be secret confidences between the colonial leaders and the British authorities? Yeah,
this actually connects with the theory, which I don't hold or reject, that Franklin was a British spy, or that he's a double agent. The only thing I can say to that is that one of the primary focuses or sources of membership from the 18th century on, in British Freemasonry in particular, was the judiciary and police and military officers. Those were the type of, it comes back to this fact that Freemasonry isn't a poor man's club. It costs money to stay into it. And generally people of some wealth and education became Freemasons, which of course made them special, right? So
Zan has contributed everything. Oh, a movie recommendation. Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. The long middle section on JFK murder. The whole film is fascinating, and she has a link to it in there. Zan, do you want to comment on that?
Well, as long as you've called on me, I actually want to ask a question.
It's your prerogative.
This entire session was amazing. And Paul, you were just super amazing. But I have to confess, from my novice perspective, I spent a lot of time on Arthur Young and Francis Yates decades ago, and I am really very out of, not knowledgeable like many of the rest of you, I would say now. And I found that I caught on kind of midstream to what you were saying, Paul. And at the beginning, it was so much stuff coming at me so fast, right, that I just couldn't keep up. I'm hoping that you have a written version of this and that you're willing to post a link, because I would really like to spend some time with it and then probably have more questions.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Oh, yeah,
Susan.
definitely will.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll invite Matthew to share his comments. And then I see hands, Barbara and Alana. Matthew Koch.
It's actually pronounced Cook, but
hello.
Hi. What I wanted to add is I'm a longtime researcher that's going to start publishing on the topic, and I actually am going to include this later in my series. Something that I think that everybody should look into, if you haven't yet, is getting a copy of Morals and Dogma, Symbolic Master of a Grand Lodge towards Night of the Brazen Serpent. You will find references to JFK's assassination in it in an alchemical sense. And what I believe personally, that's what we're seeing in this, is the cycle of the zodiac. And what the person talked about with the obelisk lining up later, the motorcade will come into Dealey Plaza in Cancer, will take a right turn.
There you go.
It will go around the zodiac. When it goes around the turn, it goes into Virgo. Then it goes into Libra, which is judgment. If you look up the tarot cards in the Sephardic Tree of Life, they align with this. At judgment is when the autumn equinox comes. And then that's when symbolic mystery of the sun, where there's the rider and the horse that's struck. And that's where Kennedy is struck in the street. He's initially hit in the throat and everything in judgment. And then when he goes to Scorpio, he's hit in the head and killed in Scorpio in alignment with the zodiac.
Wow.
Wow.
Thank you, Matthew. I saw Barbara next, and then I see Alana, and then Michelle is asking in the chat. So, Barbara, how are you? You're muted still.
It's great to see Liz and Paul and everybody.
Hi, Barbara.
Hello, Barbara.
What does this have to do, if anything, and I think it does, with Geronimo's curse? And if I understand that correctly, every president of the United States, where they're inaugurated in a year that ends in 0, will be assassinated. And that ended with Ronald Reagan. I was there for the failed Reagan assassination attempt, and there were phenomenal miracles involved with that I was involved with. I've gone public with that on The Other Side of Midnight and Robert Morningstar's show. He would be under Geronimo's curse. And then the other link that I see is with Skull and Bones. And that is because, you know, what we're told by the people who have researched Skull and Bones, the authors, is that this organization basically is behind assassinations, and they have Geronimo's skull right in the center of their cult ritual headquarters at Yale University. So, any comments?
Yes, they do. They have several skulls, and it has, you know, it's a form of quote unquote magic that people believe in, and they, you know, think if they have that skull, they have power over it, and they can, you know, do things. But again, it's all based upon belief.
Well, my point about that is that if the last Earl of Desmond's severed head was given to Queen Elizabeth as a ritual object, obviously the crown has that skull.
It's an interesting thing that seems to happen through history. Okay, so yeah, that's true.
Well, the irony there too is also the fact that the British Empire is dated to that particular moment when that happened. So the beginning of the British Empire under Queen Elizabeth I is dated to 1583. So I don't think it's coincidental. And I don't think it's coincidental that JFK should be in direct relation to that individual who lost his head on that particular occasion.
Yes, I agree. And JFK's brain, which is,
Right.
you know, that's the most important part of the head, right? It's missing for obvious
Right.
reasons.
Yes, right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So in what particular sense, Paul and or Liz, is the founding of the British Empire officially linked to that year? Can you explain that?
Well, I mean, the East India Company was created in 1600, but
Yeah.
the whole idea behind it's all Frances Yates, right? A good deal about it. There's another book she wrote called Astrea, and it's about making it's mystical imperialism. It's the creation of mystical imperialism, and what the objective is to replace the Roman Empire and the goddess, with Mary being Elizabeth I as the Virgin Queen. So the symbology is like it's complete. You could take it right out of Giordano Bruno. They're doing a transmutation into a simulacrum of what Rome represents in people's minds, and recreating the British Empire as that mystical empire of the seen and unseen world. So, you know, regardless of all the practical corruption issues and all the other things that were happening simultaneous, these very creative people, and you have like the core of British authorship and letters in Oxford, writing this stuff and formulating this stuff. I mean, you've got, you know, the people who were doing this stuff in the 16th century wound up becoming the courses that they taught became physics courses, because they were dealing with at the time what was considered supernatural, but they were dealing with basically quantum physics. And
Right.
so the kinds of things that I know that you were involved with and that, you know, we've been interested in terms of the idea of making things possible through thought and action, and what is that key? And I think Giordano Bruno is the individual who wrote up that key and who had it in the 15th century. The fact that it's still used and taught, that he is taught in the core curriculum at the London School of Economics, I think says it all.
That's it all, right. Well, I think also people might appreciate understanding that the word magic really can be reframed in the modern era. It is the power of phenomenal persuasion. And we all have that power. The way they use it is to manipulate and control. That doesn't mean we have to use the power of persuasion to manipulate and control. we can use that power to simply try to convince people of what our ideas are and why we think you should give them a fair shot. So I think a lot of people have been afraid of touching some of these powers that are associated with magic and with mystical, and have been taught that it's dangerous and it will lead to Satanism and evil. And therefore, the only use of it most people have experienced is from these incredibly powerful individuals like Giordano Bruno and his clique, obviously with Queen Elizabeth, and the modern version of that today.
Thank you.
I have one other comment, and that is, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Hopefully, Liz and Paul, we can have a long conversation offline on this. But I see this as a special case, all of what we're talking about, whether it's JFK or the Queen of, the monarch of the British Empire, or the Pope, it doesn't matter. The way I see it is there always has to be some kind of mythology that the ordinary people are propagandized into buying into to legitimize the privileges of the hierarchical elite. It doesn't matter which society you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And a perfect example is I have been following for years the story of the Stone of Destiny, which, King Charles, if you believe he's really king, which I know he isn't, but he was crowned on the throne in which the British monarchy, ever since 1296, when they thought they stole the Stone of Destiny, which originally came from Ireland to Scotland, they thought they stole the original Stone of Destiny. And my husband was Dr. Richard St. Clair Murray. He was an illegitimate, he was the illegitimate great-grandson of one of Queen Victoria's sons, Arthur. And so he was invited, his grandfather, who was a British Army captain named Arthur Clare Murray, his grandfather was invited to Westminster Cathedral for Queen Victoria's successor, Bertie, the new king. And a horrible man, big fat slob. But anyway, they were invited to Westminster Cathedral, and I have the coronation program. And I started on this quest. I realized what was really going on with the British Empire and all this propaganda, which is basically a huge con into getting ordinary people to believe that there's something special about the elite, that they're somehow connected to the divine and the heavens and all of that. This is an old saw. It's the ultimate ancient propaganda. And so in this coronation program, believe it or not, it's this beautiful illuminated document, very simple document. And you open it up, and in the upper left-hand corner with a huge multicolor illuminated letter, it explains to everyone in the audience at Westminster Cathedral for Victoria's successor as monarch of the British Empire, it explains that the authority of the monarch you are about to see crowned comes from the stone. It says so. And it turns out that they got the fake stone in 1296 from Scone Palace up in Scotland, which had originally come from Ireland, which had originally come from, at a minimum, a princess or Queen Skoda, Meritaten of Egypt, who was the crown princess of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. My point is that everything we're talking about is a huge con to try to convince the ordinary people that the elite have a legitimate claim to rule.
Thank you, Barbara. I wouldn't be surprised if Paul and Liz bang out another 4 books along those lines before they're done.
First of all, everyone, thank you who presented for your profound expertise. I mean, you crystallized somehow thousands of books and millions of thought forms. What Paul presented, and then Liz began to say what will be next steps in November and so on. You've teased us, or at least me, with going from the eros as a selfish kind of love for oneself, an egocentric love, or love for one's tribe or one's group, to you took us to the threshold of agape love. And I sense your vision of moving this group and the collective psyche into agape. You use this term, which, even though I'm a transpersonal therapist, a spiritual symbolism, and so on, I've not really been familiar with the term simulacrum. So my question is, what would be, if simulacrum is a kind of persuasive, attractive, magnetic image, a simulacrum of agape?
Okay, well, Ilana, what I would tell you is that is exactly what our project is about. November 22nd, 2024 is the launch date, that we really want to try to convince people that there is a reality to what we're talking about the nature of the use of these powers that has been used through what people consider to be magic. They consider it to be, and I said, just think of it as powerful persuasion that generates kind of energy field. And that energy field connects, and the power is through eros. Eros is the immature, I call it the immature form of love, the selfish love, okay? That's what's been used. We are definitely moving into the agape love, and that is what JFK represents. He represented the martyr. You had, rather than thinking of him just as assassinated, he represents a martyr, that he died in the purpose of believing in what he was doing for the people. The people believed in him, he believed in the people. Okay, and that is what we're trying to move people to move away from only the assassination part and only thinking about the who did it and how they did it. We've got a long way to go to sort all of the details we've just gone over today. But you can see how we can get to a better place if we can simultaneously begin to develop a positive construct to seriously take the resurrection of JFK's spirit of peace seriously. And what we want people to do is literally start focusing on what happened at Love Field, November 22nd, 1963, when he crossed through there alive and he left dead. Okay, that's a crossroad. We, as the American people, focus on that, and we start focusing and we start generating the belief that we want his return. We want his return as the man of peace and bringing back his spirit of peace. So that would be my idea, Ilana. That's exactly what we're trying to do, and help people understand these powers are real. And if we, the people of this country, can come together for this single event, and why not? What American doesn't want peace, right?
Dina and Ruth.
This was an amazing, I feel like I'm Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. I just saw the whole cake oh, he's just a wizard, it feels like that to me. And it was a combination of, not that I didn't know this, but there was a combination of what was presented having to do with Chris's overview of the process, of the alchemical process, to seeing the geometry of the cities and the intention that was there behind the creation of the Masonic intention, and then to also hear about Masonry, and then to hear this history of magic. And how the thing that I was thinking about, I don't know if you have to comment on it, but how it is that science has been used as a way of dislocating people from the real power of being a human being. And how right now I feel like there are these crossroads between this power that really wants to take over the possibility of us actualizing ourselves, and what you're uncovering of what it is that we must understand about who we are as beings in this cosmos. And I feel like this whole package is a really powerful, incontrovertible, like description of something that can awaken so many people. Anyway, I want you to say something about science, because I feel like we've been science and medicine and pharmacia and all of that. I feel like we've been tricked into being afraid as a way of controlling us.
If I could just say one thing real quick. Look, I'm the most corporeal guy you'll meet. Previous to this, if you said anything about magic to me or anything about anything like this, I would have turned around and walked away. Having gone down the rabbit hole that I've gone down with this book and these grids, my Weltanschauung, if you will, has expanded. There have been some very cosmic moments for me in this. That's for lack of a better adjective, and seeing these grids and walking through Boston and seeing these things pop up in front of my face, or in different cities. It's been a journey for me. I just add that.
Well, I would have to say that I think, just like I said before about the power of persuasion, okay, is all this is about. That's what the magic is. And it is about how you are using it. Are you using it for the positive, meaning of service to people, or are you using it to control people? If science is used for the purpose of serving people, it's a different kind of science than the science that is used to control people. It's that simple. And we know that a lot of the people who have controlled these systems are part of the control thing. And we're introducing this new idea to say we don't need it. We can walk away from it and use the power the way we want to, which is positively and to help each other.
Is that good, Ruth?
Yes, I just want to say one more thing. I feel like we're really at a juncture that is amazing with AI, because there is the process of people giving up their power, who they are as humans, and this capacity to actually channel the cosmos is being threatened by a belief that we are just machines, and that we would do well to make ourselves machines. And so I feel like there's really this timing is very, very dramatic.
Wendell, how are you?
I'm good. This has been a great roundtable. The reason that I have been drawn into all of this is through the economic piece. When Paul mentioned the movement from eros to agape, it clicked in my mind that the economics that I was drawn here by, the Henry George stuff, is absolutely agapic.
Agape, yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And
yes.
Love this stuff. But what do we do? How do we move forward as
How do we move it?
Right.
Thank you.
It's a shift in the thought form.
Remember what we said. In order to really develop world peace, we have to have economic justice, and we have to have an economy of peace. So they go together.
And at that, I'll refer everyone to the past roundtables, many of which videos are on YouTube on the channel Valediction Vision. That's Valediction Vision. Barbara, are you able to answer a quick question for me, Barbara Honegger?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I have studied JFK's assassination and many things around it in American history. And I have the impression, if not the belief, that you were the source of a very revelatory quote attributed to William Casey, President Reagan's CIA director. We'll know our disinformation campaign is accomplished when everything the American people believe
is false. Correct.
Thank you. Is there any chance when Mr. Casey said that he was joking?
Oh, absolutely not. No. This is on Quora. The circumstance of that was, as many of you know, I know Liz and Paul do. I worked in the West Wing of the White House as a policy analyst directly under the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor to Reagan in the West Wing. Before Reagan was shot, it was late February, early March. He was shot on March 30th. Reagan called all of his cabinet secretaries, and even though he wasn't technically a cabinet secretary, the CIA director amazingly doesn't have to be confirmed by the Senate. It certainly should be. At least it wasn't at that time. They all came together in the Roosevelt Room, which is on the second floor of the White House, or the main floor of the White House, because I was the chief aide to the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor, who was the convener of the meeting. It was Reagan, Bush Sr., the vice president was not there, just Reagan, all of his cabinet secretaries, and William Casey, CI director. And the purpose of the meeting was for Reagan to hear, after 3 weeks or a month of basically his government, his cabinet being in their roles in the departments and agencies of the federal government, what had they learned? What was important, and what were their main goals for their agencies? And each one of them, they went around the table like, around a kindergarten table. It was an amazing time. And when it got to William Casey, Reagan said, okay, what's the most amazing thing you learned, Bill, at the CIA in your first 3 weeks or a month? And I'll go into that later if you want the quick answer to that. But then the second question, which he asked all of the cabinet secretaries leading up to William Casey, was, so Bill, what's your main goal for the CIA in your term? And Casey, he mumbled. He mumbled terribly, but I was sitting right across because I was the record keeper, and I could hear him very, very clearly, even though he mumbled. And Reagan was sitting only, I think, 2 people from him, so Reagan heard him. And Casey said exactly that quote. He said, well, Mr. President, when everything the American people believe is false, our disinformation program will finally have succeeded. It was everything I could do to keep from choking in my chair.
Yeah.
And as soon as we left, and I wrote it down, I turned in my notes to the Chief Domestic Policy Advisor, Dr. Martin Anderson, with whom I worked at the Hoover Institution before going to Washington with him. And so I don't have those notes. They're somewhere at the National Archives, God knows where, if Dr. Anderson didn't destroy them. But in any case, the bottom line is I immediately told Sarah McClendon, who was the senior White House correspondent, of course. She'd already been there through 8 or 9 straight presidencies, administrations. And she immediately reported it on her McClendon report out of Texas. So that's how it became public. But she did not quote me, because if she had, at my request, I would have been fired, of course. So yes.
I would stretch us another 30 seconds to ask for your succinct report of what did Casey say was the most surprising or exciting thing you learned?
Well, that's also in Quora. I'm at Q's and A's. But that was the first question he asked all the cabinet secretaries. And when he got to William Casey, CI director, Casey said, and he was really perplexed and amazed. He said, Mr. President, you're not going to believe this. And I didn't when I was first told, but then I confirmed it. Do you realize, Mr. President, on the so-called intelligence side of the CIA, as opposed to the spooks, the operations side, he said, on the so-called intelligence side of the CIA, do you know what 80 to 85% of what all those people do is to read newspapers and magazines?
Yeah.
Especially foreign newspapers and magazines. So they have a lot of foreign speakers and foreign language readers. And he was amazed at that. So when I heard that, it's one of the reasons that I did my book, October Surprise. And I did all my work on 9/11 because I realized, well, my God, I can read newspapers and magazines too. And, the first draft of history is newspapers and magazines, whether they're the very first reports are usually far more accurate once the propaganda machine doesn't get into action.
Thank you very, very much.
Mm-hmm.
And breaking tradition, I am going to throw it only for final thoughts to our host, TrineDay publisher, Chris Milligan.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And again, thank everybody for spending some time with us here today. This is a very important, okay? And it's going to continue, so stay tuned. And, I like to quote JFK a lot. And, on 11/22, well, he got to speak in the morning in Fort Worth and, get on a plane instead of just drive the 35 miles to Love Field. And then he was going to speak again at the Trade Mart. And then he was going to speak later on that night in Austin. And the title of the speech at the Trade Mart was, "We are the watchmen on the walls of freedom." I'm just going to read the last paragraph of that speech. "We in this country, in this generation, one by destiny rather than choice, the watchman on the walls of the world of freedom. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility, exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that way we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. That must always be our goal, and the righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. For as was written long ago, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. And now the one he was supposed to give in Austin is titled, This Country is Moving, and it must not stop. So let us not be petty when our cause is so great. Let us not quarrel among ourselves when our nation's future is at stake. Let us stand together with renewed confidence in our case, united in our heritage of the past and our hopes for the future, and determined that this land we love shall lead all mankind into the new frontiers of peace and abundance. Amen. Om Shai. Onwards to a better future for our children.
Here, here.
Here, here. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody.
Dance, dance. Teach us to be true. Come dance, dance, because we love you.